Hey, good evening, everyone. This is John Craig.
And this is Sandy.
And we welcome you to this edition of, what is it? Walking in Spirit and Truth. I was going to say, let us reason together. I was all ready to go with that. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait, stop. It's the wrong show. So, but you're at the right show. And we sure appreciate having you guys join us this evening.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I don't know about you guys, but I tell you what, it was springtime today. After all that freezing cold, and it was sure nice to have that break. Did you know it was
spring yesterday too?
It was almost 80 degrees in Midland.
Like, it wasn't 80 degrees here, but it was warm.
So can you believe? I mean, from like below zero to where it is, my goodness.
And Shalom, Lynn, and we're so glad to have you with us. What's amazing is that it's going to be cold tomorrow. That's the panhandle of Texas.
Yeah, and that's just wintertime, isn't it?
Anyway, we are John and Sandy Craig, and we co-pastor a congregation here in Amarillo, Texas, called Life of Worship. And we have our services on YouTube Live.
This evening, of course, we're going to be continuing on in our study of Psalm 91, and especially in this day and this hour, because Psalm 91 is specifically, in my opinion, speaks to our generation in the times that we're living in right now. And I'll tell you what, we need the protection of Yahweh, but we also need to know what it is so we can have the faith that says, yeah, this is the promise of Yah for me and my family.
Well, are we ready to inch along on Psalm 91?
We are ready.
Do you have your word out?
I have it ready to go. It's right here. I don't have my glasses, though.
I think you'll have to wing it. You should have it memorized.
We'll be good. We'll be good.
Everybody, let's get into your scripture and open up your word to Psalm 91. And let's continue to explore what the depth of the meaning of this psalm.
All right. So this is Psalm 91, verse 1. Want me to read the whole thing?
Just read the first few verses.
Okay. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my Elohim, or my El, in whom I trust. For it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and bulwark. I love that, especially after the things we just talked about.
Well, it's okay. So,
and the things we can't talk about.
Let's look at the word shadow right now. Zel or Zalel. Its root is Zel. I want us to dig into that word a little bit. And I'm going to ask you, if you're taking refuge, how many of you would run to your neighbor's shadow, your husband or wife's shadow, or the shadow of your house, or something like that for protection if there was a tsunami? Would you run to someone's shadow if there was a tornado or a meteor coming? Would you necessarily think that a shadow had the substance to protect you?
No. Nope. Shadow's not going to work. Sorry.
So it would be hard to conceive that a shadow would bring cover, that a shadow would take care of you. You might even say, really? A shadow? If somebody says, go run to the shadow, go run to that shadow.
Yeah.
You would go,
maybe not.
So, and you might even think, what good is a shadow when you need real protection? Well, let's also look at another scripture in the Psalms that talks about shadow. We're not going to do a lot, but we are going to take apart a few, and that is Psalm 57:1.
Psalm 57:1.
Psalm 57:1.
Yes.
So think of the shadows.
Psalm
run over there. There's a shadow.
57:1.
It will protect you. All right.
Be gracious to me, O El. Be gracious to me, for my soul takes refuge in thee, and in the shadow of thy wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So here we have again, you're running to the shadow. If there's a tornado coming, where would you run?
To shelter.
What kind of shelter?
I'd be going to like a bunker.
A bunker?
Yeah.
If you were being invaded by another army, where would you run?
I'd be running to a bunker.
Okay. if there was a nuclear explosion, where would you be going?
I'd be running to a bunker.
Okay. I think there's a consistent thought there, right?
I think so.
Bunker.
This is unplanned, guys. Just want to let you know.
That's right. It always is. What are we talking about? So could there possibly be something better than a bunker? What's a bunker made of?
Concrete,
steel.
Reinforced steel.
Oh, we saw something the other day where they had a railroad car, so to speak, buried under the ground. And I was like, oh, I wish we had one of those under the ground, because it had stock. It was stocked and it was buried low enough under the ground to take care of things. And I was like, oh, I wish we had that.
Like one of those containers.
Yeah, like a container.
Yeah,
exactly. So you would think that those steel doors and concrete or steel containers, concrete containers, would be very safe. Is there something that is more safe than those shelters, quote unquote? Well, obviously.
Now you got my tongue. My cat's got the tongue now. I couldn't tell you.
Well, of course we know. We read the word. We read the word and it says, run to the shadow of the Most High, right? Run. Okay.
That's right.
Read that first Psalm again.
Yeah. Be gracious to me, O El. Be gracious to me, for my soul takes refuge in thee. And in the shadow of thy wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by.
And we hear in Psalm 57:1 about the refuge of the shadow of the wings. Now that is amazing. There has to be something amazing. If it's far greater than any kind of shelter we could build, which we know it is, what is it about the protection of the shadow of his wings?
Well, if you think about the shadow, it means that something is making the shadow. Something's coming between you and
But we're not running. We're not running to the something. We're running into the shadow. So you can't relate it to the thing or person. You have to only relate it to the shadow. Because you're not running to the person or the thing. You're running to the shadow.
Well,
so David, though, he recognizes something here. David says, your shadow, oh Yah, is enough for me. That's some pretty gutsy language there. If you're being chased by armies to face destruction.
In my point of view, the way I'm looking at it is, if there's a shadow, it just means there's something in between that's making the shadow.
I don't want you to think about the something in between, because it doesn't say run to Yahweh. It doesn't say take shelter in Yahweh. It says take shelter in the shadow of his wings, refuge in the shadow, So just being under the shadow to David is enough. He doesn't ask God, hey, make sure you're right there close to your shadow. In fact, that you and the shadow are like side by side. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, oh, I need all of heaven to come down and take care of me. He says, no, Father, your shadow is enough for me. So let's take it apart a little bit and see what is it about that shadow. And this may take us a while. Who knows? Because the Hebrew word is T-S-E-L. That's the root, Zadik Lamed. And that the first usage is Genesis 19:8. Now remember, the first usage of a word always will help us understand the meaning of that word and be that seed form of that word so that we can expound upon it. So Genesis 19:8.
Just 19:8. This is where over there when it's talking about Sodom. So let's see what it says. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you, and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof.
Okay, so in that instance, what is that shadow? What is that word representing?
Shelter. It's a shelter. In other words, there's a covering.
Protection.
There you go.
Okay, so we have this first usage of the word sel, T-S-E-L, that root, to mean protection, or as you said, what did you say?
A shelter.
A shelter.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let's look at Job 7:2 for further usage of this word and see if we can understand it a little bit more. Job 7:2.
The book of Job. Job. I always wondered why they didn't spell it J-O-B-E.
To confound you, my dear.
I'm completely confounded. All right. Okay.
Job
7:8.
7:2.
7:2. Yeah, that too. As a slave who pants for the shade, and as a hired man who eagerly waits for his wages.
So why is there a man panting for shade?
Because
It's zeal.
it's zeal. That's right. It's because it's zeal. It's a shelter. It is a place where there's comfort. There's relief.
Why? Because it's a desert climate. There needed to be relief there. So we should notice something here, or I'm going to ask this. What is unique about a shadow? Is it going to be in the same place 10 minutes from now, 30 minutes from now as it is at this very moment?
No, it'll move. It'll move depending on the direction of the light.
So to remain in the shadow means what? How do you remain in a shadow if it's constantly moving?
You have to be moving.
You have to be where that shadow is for sure, right?
That's right. You can't be stuck in the ground.
Well, let's talk about it. So at least the earthly shadows are what? They're temporary, right?
Yes.
They are not do they provide a permanent solution for us?
Nope. And sometimes they're small, and sometimes they're long, short or long.
It's true. So even the image that is displayed from the thing that's making the shadow, that shadow itself changes with the sun, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Is that also true of Yah's shadow? Does it constantly move? Is it ever changing? Size, shape, parameters? Does it change? Does his refuge depend upon our position, or do we depend upon his position?
It would seem to me that it depends on his position. And it also would say his position is immovable.
Well, let's check that out. So,
in other words, he's not going to fluctuate in the size of that shadow, right?
I'm asking the questions.
Okay. All right.
Something for us to ponder, isn't it?
Flip those questions back on you.
So there is a negative side to shadow. The final analysis: shadows in our world are temporary. They are real. You can see a shadow. You can't feel it, but you can sure see it. But there's no substance to them. Is that the same with Yah's? Is his shadow, does it consist of nothing, of no substance? It's real, but it is more ephemeral. Thoughts to think about. Is human life compared to a shadow? Let's look at 1 Chronicles 29:15.
I'm just thinking about the people of Israel when they're all camped around the mountain, and that the cloud was on top of the mountain, but they followed the cloud. The cloud protected them and covered them. They remained in the shadow of that cloud to protect them, and they felt the difference. If you got outside of that, you'd be in those hot desert suns.
But that cloud was Yeshua. That cloud was Yah.
Yeah.
So therefore, they were abiding in the shadow.
Yeah.
And so what is that shadow? Again, the same as a shadow that we would put forth. So let's look at 1 Chronicles 29:15.
29:15.
You were going the wrong direction.
I was really close. Okay, 29:15 reads, "For we are sojourners before thee, and tenants, as all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there's no hope."
So what does that word shadow mean there?
It means that it's something that's temporary.
It's temporary. It's not permanent. It's like a breath.
Yeah,
almost.
It's here this morning, gone this afternoon type of thing, or gone at sunset. I mean, it's just short. It's going to move and it's going to disappear.
Okay. So looking at these scriptures and we put them together, it seems a little bit as if where we stand physically or even possibly metaphorically determines the permanence and the protection that a shadow might offer. In other words, as you said, we would have to chase the shadow as it moved. And even as it changed shape, we might have to move. So there would be constant effort. If an earthly shadow could protect, it would require constant effort on our part for sure. So is that consistent with a spiritually immovable Yah? Or is it?
I would have to say that the Father would move us to the best place to be.
But that's not what I was asking. Is having to constantly move and duck and bend and squunch, is that to remain under the shadow, is that consistent with Yahweh, who says he changes not?
No.
Because the relief of the shadow, the relief under his wings, is not a function of his place in the universe, but rather it's our ability to stand under him. I'm going to say that again. The relief under his wings is not a function of his place in the universe, but rather our ability to stand. And that when you hear that word stand, just as Joe's talked earlier, it should immediately take you back to the armor, because you put the armor on, and then what do?
You stand.
You stand.
After done all, stand.
Stand. You pray. You pray in the Spirit and you stand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's our ability to stand under him. Maybe that's why David uses the title Elohim, maybe, to stand under him. Finally, I want us to look at, well, before we go there, I want us to think about that concept, our ability to stand under him. Can we stand under him? Can we maintain that stance? Or will we weaken as we're standing there? Those are all questions I'm not necessarily meaning for us to answer, but there are thoughts that I want you to contemplate as we look at this a little bit and think about the shadow of his wings. So let's look at Zel. The pictograph of Zel, when you look at it, means to catch, to need, to desire authority or control. Just the pictograph. So when you think about that, the shadow of the Most High is going to be a reflection somewhat of our need and our desire to stand under his authority. Our need and our desire. It means it's up to us, folks. How much do we desire to stand under his authority? Desire to stand in the shadow of his wings? Well, how much do we desire? How much do we need to stand in the shadow of his wings under his authority, where he's the boss? Because under him we can proclaim what? If Yahweh is for us, who can be against us? But can we truly proclaim those words if Yahweh's here and his shadow abides here and we're over off yonder doing our own thing, trusting our own way? Are we in and proclaiming we're his, but are we truly, if we aren't abiding in him, trusting him enough to stand under him? Because we can't live without him, because we can't take care of our own needs, because our own desires are irrelevant when it comes to him. So what we desire most, more than anything earthly, is him. Are we hungry enough for that? Because when we take that position and we stand, then we can say, if Yah is for us, who can be against us? So it really reinforces the thought that refuge is not actually up to Yahweh. Refuge is not up to Yahweh. It's up to you. The refuge is up to us. What does that mean to you? That when we look at that refuge is not up to Yahweh. It's up to us. Do we need him? Do we want him enough?
Well,
is our desire for him? Are we willing to submit to his authority? What?
Well, I think it's always, it goes back to what James says. If we draw near to him, he draws nearest to us. So if we are, we can't expect God to come and bow at our feet. That's not the way it works. He's sovereign. He's king. And so we have to bow to him if we want to receive his favor and have that scepter extended towards us, to where we are. But how do you do that? How's that represented? It's by our lifestyle. It's by what we do. It's by how we are living out or walking it out. Let me say it that way. Walking it out is much better, in the footsteps of Yeshua. And a lot of times, again, I think even in the Hebrew roots communities, and as well as in Christianity, is that people think they have the Yeshua peace, Jesus peace, and they're all good, and they're following Torah in the way that they think they should be following Torah, but somehow we're really kind of operating according to our own will, and often pridefully so, because we think, well, at least I'm not like that neighbor or that person, that I've got this knowledge and this wisdom, so therefore I've got to be okay. But we could be, with that type of attitude, be literally shipwrecked in our faith. And we need to, have mercy, walk humbly with our God. We've got to walk in the manner that represents that we do live in his kingdom.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. And I really want us to understand how much we need to abide in the shadow of his wings, but what it actually takes for us to do that. We've got to remember that we are the ones that need to move. We have to move into his light, into his truth, into his commands. And his commands provide protection. But we also have to remember that if the Torah is the instruction book and Yeshua is the Torah, Yeshua is also Yah. Yeshua is the one we abide in, but we trust in him and his way, not our own. I'm going to ask you this. Where are there no shadows?
Can I just say something first before I answer that
Sure.
question, or I add to that? And it has to do with, is that, one of the ways that we stay in the shadow is to follow his instructions, correct? So keeping that in mind, we think about walking in Torah, walking it out to the best of our abilities based on where we are, considering there's no temple and all that sort of stuff. We live in the wilderness, but now let's look in exile. But on the other hand, when we follow his instructions, it also means that, according to Isaiah, that he will tell us, he will say, he'll even whisper it in our ear, that still soft voice, this is the way, walk in it. In other words, there may be some very practical things that could be life or death when we're driving down the street, that we make a left turn here as opposed to continuing going straight or turning right and taking a different route, going a different direction because of what is up ahead, that the timing may be off and we might find ourselves in peril because we didn't listen or hearken unto his voice, which is the other side of Shema. And because Shema means we listen to what he said in his word, but Shema also means is what is the Spirit saying to us right now? Right now, where we're at, that could mean life or death in the next 10 minutes or in the next day or the next year. So those are some other things I want to say. Now, going back to your question.
Where do we see no shadow?
Where there's great light.
Okay, that's not really where I was going.
Where you see no shadow, though, is when we're not following in his will, following in his way.
No, I'm asking the practicality, the earthly.
Oh,
you're not going to see a shadow in darkness.
You're not going to see a shadow in darkness.
That's where I was trying to get you to go.
Turn the lights off. There's no shadows anymore.
If you walk into a dark building, will you see a shadow?
No.
Anything shadow.
No.
If you walk into a cave, will you see a shadow?
There's nothing.
Okay. So the answer to my question is, in darkness, you will see no shadow.
That's correct.
Now let's apply that spiritually. If we're walking in darkness, we won't even notice his shadow. We won't see it. We won't be able to observe it. And we might be so blind, we might not even be able to take shelter under it.
That's correct.
Because you can be in darkness and not even know it. Is that true?
That's true.
Isn't the very thought of deception meaning you don't even know that you were deceived?
Yes.
So expand upon that. I mean, when you are in darkness, oftentimes you don't even know that that's where you're where you're standing. And you don't realize it because you've become lost. You've become, if you've known Yahweh, you thought you were so familiar, or thought you knew better, or thought you'd do it on your own. But nonetheless, Yahweh's shadow is nowhere near you.
That's something that we really have to pay attention to as well, because in the familiarity of being in his presence, that we can tend to hold on to the memories. The memories of that can become so real that it feels like we still are, when in fact we may have come out from underneath the shadow because the shadow moved, and we're living in the memories of the past as
Right.
opposed to staying in the present
That's
and
true.
in his presence.
That's very, very true. So let's look back at shadow. What, just from this part, because there's more to it. This is all we're covering tonight, though. In Hebrew thought, a refuge is also what? Is a refuge something that happens at a moment? Or in Hebrew thought, is refuge something that we abide in? So that means it's an ongoing, that even though there's no movement, yet it moves with us if we're walking in his way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I'm saying? It's something physical that we do. It's not necessarily state of mind. Oh, I think, therefore I am. I'm not talking about that. That's very Greek, but it's a journey from we can't attempt to protect ourselves. You know, this, when something's coming, is not going to do much good.
Well, that's right. Because honestly, that unless he is our protection, we might be able to put up a certain amount of defense, anything that might be thrown at us or coming out of direction, and block it off. But it doesn't mean that we won't walk away without injury.
Well,
but if he is truly our shield and our buckler, so to speak, then he will completely deflect those fiery darts of the enemy, those things that be flung in our path.
I want us to think about how many times we dig ourselves into a hole thinking we're going to find protection or run away from that thing that seems to be haunting us or coming down, the debt, the circumstances that we're in. So we make a hole and dig ourselves in and hope to hide there. And it's never sufficient. It's never sufficient, because what if you're digging a hole, you're crawling into a dark place. Right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
When we're attempting to protect ourselves, think about what people usually do to protect themselves. They go into a small, darker place.
Mm-hmm. Like if you got a tornado coming, you don't have a bunker, where do you go?
Small, dark place.
Small, dark place. You go in the bathroom, closet, something on the inside of the house, away from the windows, away from places.
Away from light.
Away from the light.
But here's what we've got to understand. Shadows are a consequence of light. His shadow is a consequence of his light. So we cannot be so absorbed in our own circumstances, and we can't be so caught up in what we think is right. We need to trust in him and walk in him in all things, because we tend to go where it's dark for protection.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, no, come on into the light. Come on in and stand. Need me enough to stand under my shadow. Desire me enough to stand under my shadow, and I'll take care of you. And that's safe. So when we seek refuge in him, we have to walk to his light, his Torah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus. Because if we're hiding, then it's truly, if we are hiding on our own, it's really the opposite of protection under the shadow of his wing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so the bottom line is we reposition ourselves to where his shadow is.
And his shadow is always evident.
It's like,
as long as we seek him.
You don't go down a dark alley and where it's in a high crime rate area and then say, "Oh, Father, I need your protection." No, maybe his shadow is somewhere else where you're going to be safe, and with not walking in that lack of wisdom that would take you down a dark alleys thinking, "Oh, this is a shortcut."
That's right. Anyway, I want you guys to contemplate that. Are we abiding in the shadow? Are we desiring him enough to stand there? Do we need him enough in our lives, in the circumstances that we're walking through, to stand under the shadow of his wings? Have we positioned ourselves, or have we tried to find a makeshift shelter and really are deceived we don't even know we're in darkness? Think about those things and the circumstances and things that you're walking through. And before we leave tonight, I want you to pray, if you would.
All right. Father, we come before you, and we come because you are truly our shelter. And it is in the shadow of the Almighty that we find refuge. That, Father, that you would cause our feet to willingly go in the paths and the direction by which we find your shadow, where we find your protection, where we find refuge, so that we are protected in the day and the hour that we're living in. And as we spoke about when we opened up the programming, when there's the possibility of geological uplifts and solar and cosmic radiation and cosmic events taking place that could really rock our world, Father, there's no other place. We can't go hide in caves or in bunkers or any place else. Only where you have us is the safest place that we can be. We've got to have our eyes open to that. We need to have our eyes clear. So I ask, Father, give us eyes to see and ears to hear, but more than that, a heart of desire to be in your presence, and not to live off the memory or the stale bread of yesterday, but to stay with the fresh bread and nourishment and presence of today. We thank you, Abba, in the name of Yeshua.
In the name of Yeshua. We want to thank you for joining us this evening on Walking in Spirit and Truth. And we will see you guys next time, y'all willing. And we're excited about that. And I will see you Thursday on the next chapter. So until then, right here, my dear.
There we go. All right. Until then,
Shalom.
Shalom.